them that look, busy these players, Atkinson, Mings, they might not be the full package yet for the senior team, but if they go somewhere in Europe where they can play and learn at a very decent level, then 2-3 years down the line they will be a player in the making for the Reggae Boy team. They are just not ready as yet. Yet the young players that coming through the door, from JPL into the senior team, they are not ready as yet. Not saying that they can't make the senior team, but at this moment they are not ready as yet. Thanks for passing through again, thanks for passing through again, the second vid of the day, you understand? But this is more of the local players that you will say it's right there on the brink of going to that next level. We saw, so many players got named in the Unity Cup, and that was a successful, journey, in London. That was a successful travel for the JPL players. And I must say, since Steve McCLAREN, came in, he have been, putting in a lot of JPL players in the squad. Many people can, will speculate and say it because of that or different people in ears or whatever, but I don't know. I don't have any proof of that, but I just have to just speak on what I saw, you understand? But for a player like, Dwayne Atkinson, Richard King, you will say the main staple of a JPL player that continue more consistently getting picked whenever the senior team is going to play any form of game. Richard King is the first name from the Jamaican Premier League that will be in the squad as well. And you have the Tyrone Mings, you have the Warner Brown, you have the Stephen Young, the Shaq Davis, Benji, Tafari, you have the three goalkeepers and the co and the rest of them. Sule Makala was there, but he's over the age of where a European club will really want to play like that. But again, that will be such a experienced one. He's getting real taste of seeing a setup of a real professional players playing in Europe, like the Chukwueze, like the Simon, these players, the Ndidi, that especially Ndidi that played in this position. You'll be looking on and at the sitting on the bench and looking on the field and looking at Ndidi and how he played the game. So it's an experience for him. But I want to talk about the players, especially, the busy. I'm not going to be the one that going to come here and say, busy, not good. You understand? Mings, not good. They just didn't have that game that we want them to have. And they just, look, for players like, very, inexperienced at this level, you ask players to come into a final that they want to win. Yeah, a trophy is on the line. It's hard sometimes to go in set up like this and adapt. I remember, as a youth, just going into, Calabar, Manning Cup training camp. You understand? And I was like 15, going amongst players as 18, 19, 6 farmer, upper 6, lower 6. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking for me just being around Calabar Manning Cup system at the age of 15. You just didn't want to put a foot wrong because there's so many talented players, around the setup, and you want to prove a point that, you belong here. But at the end of the day, it's all about who's going to help that young player, nurture him. And look, wet your feet. You're not under any circumstance of where you've been pressured. You're a young player, need to settle and get in the game. So it's one of those games where Mings and Atkins just didn't match up to the level of where the game was at. They struggled, and especially Atkins came in the game when a lot of balls were flying down that right hand side for the Reggae Boys. I think it was on our right side. Nigerian were attacking down their left hand side a lot. So it was a lot of backtracking, and he didn't really get the game. It's not like when he's at Cavalier where the game cut out for him. Whenever the team try to get an outlet, he's the one that they look for. It's a different scenario here, different story, for Dwayne Atkinson. So it was a good setup, but seeing that they got a taste of the medicine of what it is to really go at the top level. And I really think that Mings and Atkinson, they have that potential, yeah, the attributes that they have, they can go to that next level. I know Atkinson went to Iceland, it didn't work out, and it's hard again for a young player to leave the JPL and go into Iceland, in a cold country up in the north. They understand, to play football. I've heard so many different stories of players, not just busy, players from different countries go north in Iceland, Finland, and fail because they are not used to the climate. The weather is brutal. So, you have games have to be playing indoor. You have games have to be playing on frozen pitches. It's just brutal playing up there. So you can't just bank on that. Said he failed. That's Iceland. It's difficult up there. But busy. A lot of people might say, this player is a JPL bully, he perform at the highest level, when he's playing JPL, but when he's playing, for the national team, it's always some type of injury. And Busy is a player that I think, for if you combine all the games and the tournaments that you take part in, Busy have closed to 30 goals contribution for Cavalier Football Club. I think he had like 10, in the Caribbean Cup. He scored like 6 goals. In the Caribbean Cup, he scored 13 goals in the Jamaican Premier League, for Cavalier in like 30 plus games. He helped them, to get over the line, versus, not just versus Mount Pleasant, but to carry them on his back through the entire of the playoff system. So he's a quality player. It's all about, look, and let me just say this before I go any further. You have to give Rudolph Speed a lot of credit. You understand? You have to give him massive credit, to help develop this player, help develop, the Richard King. It's all about that next step. How will those, how those players will move on to the next step? The Mings, the Warner Brown, the Atkinson, how they will move to the next level of trying to get that contract. Because I do feel like Busy, he needs to get out of the Jamaican Premier League, just like King. King not supposed to be in the Jamaican Premier League coming next season. There's already a campaign, we could see it with Steve McCLAREN trying his best, to be talking about Richard King, look, his quality is there, so nothing wrong with that if Steve McCLAREN is talking about him and try to be on that campaign so he can get out of the door, he get a better career of himself, to help to feed his family, help to feed, his younger one and everything. You understand? So just be a better man and see what football is, can offer to him out there, and say if he could be one of those successful, defenders. We have Damian Stewart, that's his name, in the past, and a few more players like Claude Davis, so we have defenders, came straight out of the Jamaican Premier League into Europe and stuff like that. So hopefully Richard King is that one. Hopefully Mings another player that, he can, go back to Mount Pleasant and work on himself and, take this experience and know what it is, how it is to play in England as well. Played on a Premier League pitch, Brentford, a pitch that they watch Ethan Pinnock defend his life and day in and day out. So that's a big motivation for the Richard King, the Mings, that they can play at this level. Look at the crowd, look how the crowd engage the players and the pitch. So there's a lot of credit, and we have a few more players in the Jamaican Premier League that it's just that one last move. Can they get themselves over the line? Nikolai Fuller is one of those players that I think, look, 1v1 is just as good as Busy Atkinson. You have Ellis, Nikolai Ellis as well from Racing. That's a player that if he can play one more season in the Jamaican Premier League, work on himself, work on his strength, work on his fitness, bulk up a little bit and try to be as close as 70% of what European standard really want. Look at how Craig Butler develop his players. They are close to the level of where European players, European clubs want them to be. Dojan Whisper Richards, a player that he's a complete player at his age group. You have gone through the full process of development and what they need from a young player coming to the door at a top elite clubs. You understand? It's just holding him to just how he can adapt to the scenario for the team want to play, and start to build on himself and start to engage his body, how he's going to make the next step of You know, it's not schoolboy football, it's not academy football. No, your body will need to adapt to that next stage. You know, so you know, it's time, you know, for these players to get out of the door. And I mean, there's quite a few players down there, and this is a very good time when you're talking about reggae boy players, you know, young players that's coming to the door. You know, Stephen Young, another player, again, defender for Portmore, that I think is right there, that if he can manage to get himself out of the Jamaican Premier League and go somewhere, you know, in a development league, you know, in Europe, small countries in Europe, Bulgaria, Romania, North Macedonia, you know, you name it, one of those country, and develop, you know, build on yourself and see what it is out there. You know, Warner Brown got his taste already of what it is, you know, played in Europe, and he came back, and he's going to be out through the door again very soon. You know, so I mean, very, very, you know, good amount, you know, I mean, good amount of players down there that really needs to get to that next level. You know, you have the player that play for Mount Pleasant, you know, they one of their brightest academy player, you know, of Devante Campbell, another player that only if he can, you know, manage his body a lot more and, you know, stay away from injuries, you know, I mean, it will be good. We have good players in the league, but it's all about market them, you know, with good agency, you know, get them into that perfect league where they won't be under a lot of pressure. You know, they're going to go through development stage, you know, they're going to make mistakes, and the club will believe in them. And, you know, go to clubs where you be an asset, where they can see that, look, if we can make 300,000, you know, from these players and sell them with a clause on where they can move on to, you know, another club where a couple $1 million, then that club will make money, and then they will come back, you know, to Jamaica again for another players. You know, so good times in reggae boy football, good times for the players, the JPL players that, you know, keep getting in through the door of the national team, you know, whatever game it is. And Joshua Anglin, another player that, you know, so we have the players them that, look, busy, these players, Atkinson, you know, Mings, they might not be the full package yet for the senior team, but if they go somewhere in Europe where they can play and learn at a very decent level, then 2-3 years down the line, they will be a player in the making for the reggae boy team. They are just not ready as yet. Yet the young players that come into the door, you know, from JPL into the senior team, they are not ready as yet. Not saying that they can't make the senior team, but at this moment, they are not ready as yet. You know, it's a different level. You know, Kaim Dixon went through his phases. You're not going to get players like Dixon. You're not going to get player like Richard King. You're not going to get player like Whisper that going to be ready, full-blown ready, you know, coming out from, you know, academy or JPL football, you know, raw, just like that into the senior team. You're not going to get talent like that every day, but for now, the ones them that we have now, they are not ready as it. It's just them to make that next step, and that next step is to get that transfer out of the country and then move on and, you know, build on your career, and then a year or two you will be ready, and then they should be up for selections, and then they cannot, you know, quality depth around the reggae boys pool. But I mean, that's it, people. You know, thanks for watching. This is Nicardo Media House. I'm out. Salute.